So this is the first of a number of videos that are looking at Unit 4.2, trade protection in the unit on global economy. So this one's about tariffs. And one thing about tariff theory is a very good topic to do an IA on. So if you find a relatively recent news story, less than 1 year old, that is looking at tariffs, more recently they've started to look, particularly from the US, at Joe Biden removing tariffs, which works in just the opposite ways of how I'm going to talk through the tariff theory this morning. So this is the standard tariff diagram. And what you use this diagram for is in a number of ways. I mean, first of all, you've got your world supply here, perfectly elastic. And what that shows, if you remember back to Unit 4.1, where we looked at when countries will import or export, with the world price being below the domestic equilibrium, this is the domestic demand, this is the domestic supply curve. So with the world price being below domestic equilibrium, this is a country that's going to import. So we can see on here that the country will, at this particular price here, if I draw that relatively straight, you'll see that the demand here is H or Q4, that's how much will be demanded domestically, whilst domestic firms are only able to supply that amount Q1. So the difference, Q1, Q4, is going to be the level of imports. We can also see then that once the tariff is imposed, the tax increases the price up to P2, and if that's the case, then now the demand domestic will be a Q3, and the domestic supply will increase to Q2, meaning that the level of imports has gone down. So at a very basic sort of level, we can just see that the imposition of the tariff is effective and it achieves two goals. One is to reduce imports from Q1, Q4 to Q2, Q3, and secondly is to increase domestic production, which it does by increasing domestic production from 0 Q1 to 0 Q2. You want to go a little bit further than that, though, a bit deeper in terms of your understanding of welfare or surplus areas. And the thing to look at here is both consumer and producer surplus, both before and after the tariff. So if we go back to before the tariff is imposed, and here we are at this price here, the triangle that I'm drawing for you now, P1, H to Y, is the consumer surplus when there is no tariff. It's relatively large because the price is low, the world price is quite low, and domestic consumers consume quite a lot. And what we also notice is the producer surplus, because the domestic producers are not producing very much, is relatively small, which is just P1, E and X, because they don't produce very much P1 because the price is too low. After the tariff is imposed, things change a little bit, and what we notice is that the consumer surplus decreases because the price is pushed up to this purple area triangle here. So more importantly, or more relevant for us, is that the consumer surplus has decreased, and I'm going to take these colors off in a moment. The consumer surplus has decreased by this area, P1, P2, I and H. Okay, so that area there is the decrease in consumer surplus, and let's just show it here. So that's the fall in consumer surplus that the tariff has caused. Now, obviously that makes consumers worse off, but it doesn't necessarily make society worse off. We need to just add a couple of things to it. One is that as a consequence of the higher tariff, the producer surplus increases to this total area here. So part of the consumer surplus that's lost, the shaded bit here, is just a transfer to domestic producers. So it's not lost completely, it's just a transfer from domestic consumers to domestic producers. There's also this area here, which shows that's the vertical distance is the tariff or the tax, and that's the level of imports here from G to J. So the tax is imposed on each of those imports, which will give tariff revenue to the government. So the domestic government is also receiving that tariff revenue, which basically is paid by the consumers, domestic consumers. So that area of consumer surplus that's lost, that rectangle, again, is just a transfer from the domestic consumers to the government. So that leaves us with two triangles, and it's these two triangles that are important now, because that triangle there and that triangle there are known as the deadweight welfare losses of a tariff. Okay, so even though a tariff is successful in achieving smaller imports, larger domestic production, it does cause this cost in terms of there being a deadweight welfare loss. So the two losses, this one here, the IHJ triangle, that's welfare that's lost because the consumers just simply are not consuming that quantity Q3, Q4 anymore. So that one's fairly obvious. This triangle here, EFG, that's lost consumer surplus because that quantity Q1, Q2 is produced, but it is now produced by less efficient domestic producers rather than the more efficient overseas producers. So we end up paying a higher price for the product than we otherwise might have done. Okay. So just moving on, if we look at, I mean, the other slides here will basically just go through that process with you, and we'll show you the different areas. And then when the tariff is imposed, it asks you about, is it successful? Yes, it is. The reasons that I gave. But it will also then look at those areas again. So there's my gain and my loss, and my deadweight welfare losses are shown on this presentation here. You can find this presentation on the website linked under tariffs. It's quite a nice, I mean, much cleaner version of it here, which gives you a couple of questions to answer in terms of testing your understanding of this theory. Next slide does give you the answers, so you may or may not want to jump ahead too soon. And then what I've done on the final 4 slides is for higher level students, I've taken a couple of questions from paper 3 and just giving you this one here, which has got some questions relating to tariff areas, tariff theory. And this question here, again, the number of questions afterwards that you can test your understanding of in terms of what we've just been talking about.